To explain frames within PicturesToExe, imagine one of those mobiles that people make at Christmas, a wire coat hanger from which Christmas decorations can be hung. Think of the coat hanger as our frame, which in effect could be animated and could be rotating gently, while the Christmas decorations hanging from it are moving in a different direction. I suppose we could think of the frame as an invisible container to hold other objects, text or images. The frame becomes the parent and the objects, text and images become the children. The frame can be animated independently to the images, objects or text that is within it. So frames are generally used when we have the need to control maybe a large number of images as a group, such as what we're seeing on screen at the moment. Here I have a multi-image animation, albeit that it uses just one image. I'm going to provide the slide style for what you can see here, so you can import it and apply it into your own version of PicturesToExe. It's often useful to be able to look at the animation in your own version of PicturesToExe, but let me take you through how it was created. I created this animation for my camera club. At the end of each competition, we show the high scoring images and give them the author's name and the title of the image. So this was created for something like that. You can see it's made up of 5 versions of this particular image, but in actual fact it's 4 that produces that rotation and 1 is the background. This one is the background. So whenever you're doing work like this, make use of the Properties tab. So we don't want to see all of these labelled the same. So if you go to the frames 6 at the bottom, you can see the bounding box around the outer edge. If you look at the background and ignore what's going on in the middle, you can see that I did add a degree of zoom to the background. So select the background, and before you start creating any animation, go to the properties and change it here. It just helps you to follow your own animation and to be able to identify the parts of it when you want to make changes with keyframes. Now let me move my cursor just along a little bit so that I can see all of those images spread open, because when I planned this I created red as the top frame, then green, then blue, then I decided to add a fourth, which was the yellow one at the base. So starting at the top, it wouldn't be a bad idea to change these too. And of course we would be doing this before we started any of the animation, because that's the whole point of doing this. And remember, what I'm doing here doesn't change the name of these images when we come out of this screen and we look at them here. They still retain their original names. If I select red, hold the shift key and select yellow, I'll select all of those in between. Now we can follow exactly what's happening here. When we look at these keyframes, and I'll highlight them all holding the control key, if we go to the animation tab, you can see that as a group I reduce their size to 50%. Between this keyframe and the next keyframe, 3 of them rotate clockwise, but the red one rotates anti-clockwise. Took a little bit of trial and error to get something which was visually appealing. But if I select, let's say, the green here, you can see that the rotation is -45, the blue -90, the yellow -180. So you can see a sort of logic there. But the red one, That one just rotates the other way a little bit, but it does seem to just work when we press play. It does seem to just all slot into place. So when our cursor reaches the second group of keyframes, the only image we can see is the red one. The green, blue and yellow are still there, but because they're behind the red, they're hidden from us. So that's why you can only see keyframes on the red image at the top. I don't need to apply any animation to these. So what I've done between this keyframe and this keyframe is precisely nothing, because it seemed to be more appealing if, when the rotation come to a stop, it didn't immediately start growing in size to fill the screen. I wanted just, as you can see there, just 1 second to allow that to sit there, and then between 16 seconds and 20 seconds it's just a red image that comes back to the full screen size. So there we can see we're back to 100%, and the color correction that I'd applied back on these keyframes had been removed. The color correction, by the way, if I go back to the red, is simply the coloration, and I've selected, let's go to this one and select coloration. I've just selected red from here. But of course you can adjust them, and I did with the red. Because red is sitting on top, I also added a brightness and contrast, and I tweaked that as well. But the green, blue are almost identical, and the yellow, well, you can just create any color yellow you wish. So you can see when you break down those keyframes exactly what they do to our animation. Spin everything round into a nice pack, sit there for a second, zoom back on screen, and then of course we've got some text appearing. Now before we move on to the text, I suppose what I should do here is to just remind you that on the red, green, blue and yellow keyframes at the start, we also need to add speed. And what I added here was the custom speed of 50 and 50. So we can tuck it away, but you'll find I've applied that to each of these in turn. And of course I needed to do the same thing from this keyframe, because from this keyframe to this keyframe nothing happens, but now we're going to zoom up. So now I've got my speed applied to my zoom animation. Let me just add the text in here by holding the control key and highlighting the text. So you can see what I've done. I'm going to allow the image to come up fully on screen, and just as it comes to a rest, then the text, which is already on screen, fades up. So the first keyframe of the text has no opacity, the next keyframe is full intensity, the next keyframe is full intensity because that's the time scale we want the text to be on screen, 21.5 to 24 seconds, and then the last little bit will take the opacity down to 0 and remove the text from screen. So when you break it down and look at things like this, it's not such a difficult animation at all. Now if we was going to create an animation and we wanted to control it with a frame, we would normally start with the frame first. So if I come out of my objects and animation screen, if I just go back to the blank at the end here and open this up into the objects and animation screen, I created this just to demonstrate at the start of this particular video, so I'll just delete that. So if I wanted to apply a frame, there it is up here. We see the wireframe around the edge, and we can animate it. We have a keyframe and we can apply as many keyframes as we wish. So if I wanted to begin making that animation we've just looked at, I would select the frame, right click and add an image. Now I need to navigate to where I'm working just for the first time, and then it should remember it, and I would add one copy of my image. And you can see by the way this is staggered that this is the parent and now this is the child. To do that a number of times, which I needed to do, I would go back to the frame, right click, add an image, Now we're going back to the right place, so the process speeds up. So you can see how we would do this as we gradually built up the animation. But of course there are many times when we start to create an animation, then we have a stroke of genius, a bit of creativity kicks in. We get different ideas for the animation and think, I wished I'd have provided myself with a frame because I could use one. Well, we can apply one at any stage. To demonstrate that, let's go back to the original animation. Now, coming back to our animation, I've just noticed that I've got my keyframe times set differently to how I said I was going to keep the keyframe time throughout these videos. So I slipped up here for some reason or other. We should be measuring from 0, but we're actually measuring from 10. Remember the little setting is Tools, remove the tick from the global times of keyframes, and now we're back to our zeros. So what I was about to say here was we need to apply a frame. But the frame is going to be the parent, so we don't want the frame applied as a child to any of these. So click into the area down the bottom here, and you'll deselect everything. We can then select the frame, and the frame will be located at the top. If you need the frame in a different position, you can always right click and you can choose the order. But you've got some keyboard shortcuts here which are much more friendly, I think. Hold the control key and hit page down, and as you can see we can drop the frame, image, text, anything we do in this way. We can take it down to any level, and page up, we'll bring it back up. So what is it we want to make as children of our parent frame? Well, I think I want my text outside the frame because I've got an idea to reduce the size of the image, which will leave the text nicely off the picture, which will be good if you're going to present that picture with a name and a title. So I'm just going to select red, green, blue and yellow. The background can be animated independently. I'm going to right click and cut those, but don't worry, we haven't lost them. If we go back to our frame now, highlight it and right click, we can paste them in, and as you can see now they become children of the parent. And I can select the frame and we can see the frame right at the top. So we know that when the cursor reaches that point that the image is fully on screen. So I'm going to bring this keyframe and I'm going to line it up, because the first thing I'm going to say with this keyframe, which is controlling the frame, and remember everything is within the frame or everything we want, what I'd like to do here is to have the image slightly smaller. I generally present the images around 85 and I sometimes even drop them down a little bit so that as they come up with the text actually comes up off the picture. I think I've got that a little bit wrong. I think it's a little too far down, so we'll bring it up a little more. We'll just see where the text comes. That looks okay, doesn't it? Now my animation is looking pretty good. If I put my cursor back at the start and press play, we should get the entire animation that we first intended. The only difference is we've used a frame to control everything, so that we've just limited the size the image appears on screen for the time we want the image to be viewed. But of course what we could also do is maybe use the frame to remove all the images from the screen. Because if I just temporarily select the final keyframe of the red channel, if I were to, let's say, move this off screen, obviously it's going to reveal the green, blue and yellow that are still sitting behind there. So what I want to do here is to move everything off screen using the frame, because the frame is the parent. So making sure I identify the frame layer, I need another keyframe, 16 to, well, I think if we have that, if the keyframe is at 18 seconds when it starts to fade off screen, I think we could possibly have this around about 16. So from that point to that point, nothing happens to the picture, but between this point, and I'll hit another keyframe, we can decide what we want to do. Let me drop this down to 50%, because here I'm going to need to decide what I'm going to do, and I think I'll pan it, I think I'll rotate it, I think I may even give it a little bit of 3D and a bit more pan and bring it down the bottom, no, the top. I think you can see what I'm doing here. Let me now close this, go back to the image immediately before it and press play here, so we get to see the whole thing, including the fade on screen and off using the frame. Now, that's a deliberate mistake, and that's going to happen a number of times. If we go back to the Objects and Animation screen, the reason it's happened is because what I did here and here is to insert a keyframe. So if you look at this one here, you can see that the pan X is set to 0. Here the pan is turned off, so the animation now is working from this keyframe. It's bypassing that for the pan and going to this. So what we need to do is just make sure that whatever we did we zoom it? I'm not sure, but you can tick them anyway. We certainly rotated it. So now, whoops, move that a little bit. Now it should work perfectly okay. But that, I think, is pretty typical of the sort of things that we're likely to find. And all it is a keyframe that's not turned on. So now we should get our pause. We enjoy the image for the time it's on screen. Text goes and the image leaves the screen. Now the one thing we do have left to do is to apply some speed to our frame. Now remember, when we worked from the 16-second point to the 20-second point, thereabouts, we applied pan and we applied rotate. So those are the options we've got to apply to this keyframe. And when we're moving off the screen as we are here, I tend to use the accelerate. So with the pan, I'm going to apply the accelerate there and also there. Now I'm going to give it just a little more. I think if I was doing this for real, I probably would add maybe a second on to the slide time, just to give a little more time for this to leave the screen, but it's probably going to be okay. Let's shut down this screen, put the cursor just before it, and we'll press play for the last time and take a look at what we have. Remember, I'm going to save this as a slide style and include it with the download. And that looks pretty good, I think. Now once I've created my slide style, let me drag the image down up here, but we can drag any image down here to run this slide style on it. If I go to my slide style, I've called it a red, green, blue in the category and rotate here, so I'll select it. But of course if we ran this, we would get the text coming up, name and title. So for my purpose in the Camera Club, I would have beside me the name of the author, so I would go to the Objects and Animation screen, select the text, and I could just put it in there. And that's all we would need to do. If I just press play or just use the cursor here, you can see that the correct text appears.